Hi there, my name is Seakga Tladi. This is African Disclosure, and this is our program for today. Right, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us. Now, as South Africa approaches another commemoration of June the 16th, we're going to take a moment to look beyond the streets of Soweto. The streets of Soweto, which tell a story that so many people are familiar of. We know the story of June 16. We've seen the famous photographs, and we have celebrated the holiday for years and years. But I want to examine a chapter of our liberation history that can sometimes receive a bit less attention. And this is the role of international solidarity, and specifically the relationship between South Africa and South Africa's struggle movements and the Soviet Union. A very, very deep relationship that runs back many, many years and continues to this day. See, for decades, while the apartheid state banned organizations and imprisoned and exiled struggle heroes, supporters came from all corners of the globe. Military, education, diplomatic support, logistical support, all of the support came from nations outside of South Africa who were helping the people of South Africa to fight against the scourge of apartheid. So today, I want to unpack what that support actually looked like. And I also want to talk about what international support means today. I want to draw the parallels between what sort of international support we needed back then and what kind of international collaboration we need today. And who are the countries that are friendly to us? Who are our real partners? From all the way back then and to this day. There are many countries that claim to be our partners, like the United States, for example. The United States claims to be a friend of South Africa, even when it makes moves that are outright, unquestionably adversarial towards South Africa, like lying about a genocide of white people, like uninviting South Africa from a G20 of which it is a member, a full member. So who are our partners today, and how different does the picture look today than it did in 1976 and the years after that, coming after apartheid? We're also going to be reflecting on a broader question of how do we honor international solidarity without diminishing the courage and sacrifices of those who fought apartheid on the ground here and those who still fight against injustice on the ground of South Africa. So, to help us unpack all of this, to help us really get into the meat of this issue, I've invited a very, very good friend of the show, someone who has spoken to us many times and is speaking to us for the first time in person. I was fortunate enough to be able to grab Khonya Mathonsi while he was in Johannesburg so we could have a conversation. We could talk about June 16, first and foremost. We also spoke about international solidarity during apartheid and what international solidarity looks like today. I'm very happy to bring you this special episode of our show, and I hope you enjoy. So without any further ado, here is my interview with Mr. Khonya Mathonsi. All right, we've had him over Zoom many, many times, and now we're finally lucky enough to have him in studio. It is the one and only Khonya Mathonsi, and I've brought him onto the show today so we can talk about not only June 16 as we celebrate the holiday, but also the legacy of international solidarity and the role of the Soviet Union in supporting the armed struggle in South Africa. So for the first time in person, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. We have been planning for this to finally happen, and I'm happy that we finally meet. We've been talking through Zoom, and finally it's happening. And I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm also very, very glad you're here. It's a long time coming, and yeah, let's get into it, right? So we prepared to commemorate June 16th. We were speaking a little bit outside just before starting, and I guess we both kind of thought to ourselves, okay, yes, we celebrate this holiday, but it's almost like it's kind of played out. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, many young people know about the Soweto uprising, but I want to get into an important dimension about afterwards and the international dimension of the armed struggle. So, how important was global solidarity to sustaining resistance against apartheid?
It was very critical. It was important, even though it was one-sided. There were countries that were talking; they were not doing much. Like the Western countries, they did organize concerts. They did give us music. They did give us musicians. But in terms of the economy, their corporations were here. They continued to operate. I mean, we drank Coca-Cola. We were eating KFC. So there are the Zone B block. They were directly involved. I'm talking about the likes of the Soviet Union and many other Eastern European countries that were part of the struggle. But as far as the Western countries, it was a talk show for them. They wanted to say the right thing. They wanted to be relevant in saying whatever that they wanted, but they didn't help much. Remember, they did deny some of the South African freedom fighters to be in the U.S. You know, they even influenced Saddam Hussein at some point. Don't take them. You know, that's why in Iraq they were denied, to go there, get military training. Hence, the likes of Moses Kotane was from 1963 until 1978 he died. His grave was in Moscow. And when the South African government tried to get him back, Russia refused until Zuma had to intervene and speak to the Russian Federation leadership. The grave remained and the remains of Moses Kotane then returned to South Africa. So that is to tell you how much of influence the Soviet Union had in South Africa. Other countries, can't really speak for them. Their corporations were here. Anglo was here. Their media houses were here to protect and only report on what was very important. And they played down a lot of things that happened. So, yes, there was a solidarity in some countries. And you still see that battle happening even now. That thing has not yet changed. You still see the Westerns are not comfortable by the presence of Russians in Southern Africa, or should I say Africa as a whole. So, because Africa still remains a battleground for them. So, as far as their contribution in June 16 was to play down most of those events that happened. I mean, the history that were taught at school was written by them, telling us what was happening on the day, until we actually meet the people that were involved, and then you hear a different story. So in terms of, yes, you will call it global solidarity, but to me it's not really that, because it's not everyone who agreed with what the students did at the time.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a complicated picture because I think it's very fair. It's very fair the criticism you make of saying that, by the time any real solidarity was shown by a lot of Western countries, it was too late. When apartheid was already, it was unacceptable. Now it was beyond the point of being ugly.
Yeah.
I make the criticism often. If you want to know what apartheid is, right, you should ask South Africans. Don't ask Americans, because Americans denied South African apartheid, and even today, what happens? They deny apartheid in Palestine. So anyway, the point I'm trying to come to there is very much agreeing that by the time real help came in terms of the boycotts, mind you, that were started by grassroots organizations, by the people in Western countries, not necessarily by governments. But by the time that came, it was almost too late. But June 16 did play a big role in showing the ugliness of the apartheid regime. Now, historical accounts often mention that after the banning of liberation movements and imprisonment of leaders, the Soviet Union became one of the countries supporting anti-apartheid forces. So, what form did this support actually take in practice? Like, what sort of support was the Soviet Union providing to anti-apartheid fighters in terms of education, military training? What form did it take?
The most important thing that was supposed to, or something that stood out, was military training. This was an invasion. You needed to go back home, arm yourself, fight. Hence you'll know the likes of some people from ZANU-PF, Frelimo, SWAPO, MLPA, the Angolan groups, hence the likes of Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and the Soviet helped when the Portuguese left Angola. So the Soviets were using Cuba to channel the arms. So the whole idea was the arms. Hence, South Africa invaded Angola to want to neutralize the influence of communism, in the southern region. So the most important thing was arms. They knew. Remember, even the time Russian economy collapsed, they still had arms. They had no food. They still had arms. I remember watching news, sitting with my brother in Durban. In the news, it was reported that the teachers in the Soviet Union, there was no money to pay them. They were only going to get paid by vodka. And it was a true story. We were watching news. We laughed at it. But this is the country that, regardless of what was happening, they had arms. They wouldn't have food, but they will have arms. So they knew, they wanted to replicate that to us, to say, whatever that is happening, whatever that you do, make sure you're armed. So you won't have people playing around your doorstep. So that was the most critical point. That was the most important thing that the Soviets could do. Education, yes, but you cannot be educated if you are not protected. Hence now you can see that even when you are trying to provoke them, you need to calculate how you deal with them. It's a nuclear power country. So one wrong move, it will just melt the whole entire planet. So they needed us to have that kind of capability. They were well aware that South Africa, at some point, we were a nuclear power country. So they understood the intensity of how the system was. And so many people were killed through that. Women were raped. A lot of things went wrong. The only option that was left was to fight back. So their influence and their advice to the comrades was armed struggle is the way to go. Hence, there was a split between Chief Albert Lithul and Moses Kotane. Chief Albert Lithul was not in favor of the armed struggle. Hence, he was decorated as a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
And then, whereas Moses Kotane was really organizing with the Soviets. So the most important thing for them was to ensure that the natives of South Africa fight back, and they needed to be armed. So that kind of support was one thing that was critical.
Yeah, I when you talk about arms, it's interesting because I'm reading Bob Newland's book, Wherever the Struggle Is. And he speaks about how the MK, or he was an Englishman who came here and he did a lot of covert operations with the London recruits, anti-apartheid covert operations. But he writes about how the MK was smuggling arms into South Africa all the way until 1994. Even though negotiations had begun years earlier, the leverage of needing guns, they there was this mistrust all the way until the final day, with some smuggling operations running all the way into 1994. So that smuggling of arms and that arming of the liberation struggle is a quintessential relationship between the Soviet Union and many liberation movements in Africa, not just in South Africa.
Yes. Look, it was known at some point in Durban, there was a ship that came and stopped in a certain place where it was full with arms. And nobody knew what was happening in that ship, and those arms disappeared. We don't want to say where those ships came from. It stopped in a place called Blue Lagoon. Arms were distributed through that system. But also, I must indicate that the reason why the smuggling of these arms, we want to believe that it stopped in 1994. The trust was not there. Remember, the apartheid government continued with their operatives. They did not really stop. They knew that at some point, whatever that the new regime was coming into, it needed to be disturbed. And it was so unfortunate that in South Africa, we are one of those countries where the colonizer never left. This is the colonizer that was armed at some point. This is the colonizer that raped. This is the colonizer that stole. This is the colonizer that killed. So that colonizer never really left. Hence, we're saying that even back in the day, their corporations were here. So the trust wouldn't be there simply because somebody said something. And they continued. I mean, you might have seen, it's yet to be tested what Arthur Fraser said, that there were plus or minus 66 people, including journalists and some government workers and some people from the ruling party who were recruited to work for apartheid government. So where would the trust come from? You know, because they're still here. They have their party that represent their interest. So you wouldn't trust such. Till this day, the trust is not there. We can see what is the reverse of the events. It's in real time. Hence, I always said our townships are concentration camps, and we have not seen much of a change since then. So, due to the fact that the colonizer never left, we wouldn't trust most of the things that were said simply because in the name of diplomacy. No. So he's right when he said that. Some of those operations never stopped. They still continued for their dominance, whether in the marketplace, whether in media, whether in sport. You're still wearing a rugby top that still have a springbok that was a symbol of Africans' dominance, where the likes of Louis Late and Johardo Pet fought hard for. So that is to tell you that the dominance of the colonizer is still there. He wouldn't let it go like that. So where are the arms? They probably still armed, waiting for the day where things will go wrong. Though we are pushing more of the diplomacy, but economically, our people are still thrown under the bus. So the trust wouldn't be there.
Yeah, scathing criticism, as usual. Now we don't want to. I mean, we've gotten into the military side a little bit, but there, even to this day, there's still an important relationship between the Russian Federation and South Africa in terms of education and scholarships. And that's sort of a softer support in terms of shaping South African leadership. So I wanted to maybe ask about some of our leaders who got educated in the Soviet Union. What role do you think that played in how they were able to take South Africa into democracy?
Look, the skills, and I must also indicate that till this day, the Russians are still training our pilots. Are still trained in Moscow. So some of our pilots you see in the military air force are trained in Moscow. So that kind of assistance, doctors are there. Mpumalanga government still had a deal with some cities in Moscow where our students are there getting education. In terms of the approach, remember they had the biggest wars. they were confronted by biggest monsters of the Nazis. So the tactics and how we should approach things, it's different from how you will acquire from the West. The West have always been offensive. The zombie countries, Russia, China, Iran, are more on the defense side. Hence, when they have arms, it's for their own defense. You will still see even now when Iran is fighting, it's not really attacking New York. It's defending their territories wherever they are. So those things helped a lot of some, not a lot, some of our leaders who are pro African, who were who were pan-African, so to say, who wanted to see the real difference, because not all the leaders that we see today are for the people. No. Some of the leaders have crossed over. Hence, there are so many questions that we can't really get answers. We have so many commissions running today. So yes, the contribution from the Russians or the Soviet Union did work for those that were serious, for those that contributed. So it doesn't end there. Hence, I said, even the Air Force, currently, it's still happening. Those skills are going to be transferred.
I think the justification for those American Marines in Cape Town was some sort of co-training that they have done regularly. And still, if this was Russian soldiers doing the same thing, I do think there'd be uproar.
Those two bombers, those big, they landed in OR Tambo. They came when in 2018 or 2017, they came, landed here, and then they left. There was a big hoo-ha. What are they doing here? The lies that were told about the ship that South Africa gave Russia weapons. How? How can South Africa give Russia weapons? Let's stop joking here. These are the people who supported us. Which arms are we going to give? We can't even afford bullets. So which arms can we give to the Russians? The Russians have been stockpiling for over 60 years. I must also indicate to you that there is a project called Project Swing State. What does it mean? Russia, China, Iran. This has to be confronted militarily. They kept, Russia will be kept busy with Ukraine. China will be kept busy with Taiwan. Iran is kept busy by Israel. Now, the South Africa, there's Brazil. These are the original BRICS members. One of these, including India, who knows where India stands in BRICS right now? Nobody knows. 1 minute they tell you that they are ready to trade with the BRICS currency. The next minute they tell you, no, we're not ready. We're not going to be part of it. Now, in this very country, Paul Mashatile said, no, South Africa is not ready. While Lula da Silva, he has a lot of problems there. So there are countries that are kept busy. And that project does not stop. You saw that the coming of GNU. You see the Zionist project. Now we have a South African APEC now. Instead of APEC, it will be SA. This public affairs of Israel that are happening here in this country. Now, some of us who also want to believe that this March and March and all of that, they're raising genuine concerns, they're raising things that are legitimate, but this movement is going to be hijacked by people who are not happy with the fact that South Africa stood up and took Israel to ICJ. So these are some of the things that they will do to hijack every project in this country to go their direction.
Now, maybe just bringing it back to and it is interesting how all these things intersect, because that was my next question that you've maybe already addressed, is that South Africa and Russia do interact through diplomacy, through BRICS, through trade and other global south platforms. And these modern partnerships, in some ways, can be seen as a continuation of liberation era solidarity. Or on the other hand, do they reflect a completely different set of strategic interests? So, is South Africa collaborating with these countries in the same way that it was during apartheid, during the liberation struggle? And what are some of the differences between that interaction?
The South Africa, 60-70% of South Africa, it's controlled by Western corporations. So part of the reasons why they will be uncomfortable in BRICS taking off, it will be mainly that it means that they are losing. Hence, they will put up the fight. So you won't see any relationship with the West that will be cordial in understanding that we are about to do a deal with China, Russia, India, Iran. They won't. They won't allow that because the owners of these companies are the ones that fund these organizations, fund these candidates to just champion the policies so that you can do what they want. The Anglo, historically brought media in this country. They dictate. They brought the political system of this country. So the political system was created after the economic system. So the political system will be there to ensure that the policies of economy is protected. So interactions between these two, when you interact with the pro-multipolar countries and the unipolar countries, is not the same. You might have seen when Queen Elizabeth died, African heads of state were picked up by a bus, all of them in one bus. Like your Ruto, your Manawanga, all of them were in one bus like school kids. And European leaders that they lent, the limos were there, they brought their cars, they were there. That was to send a message. That's how they see you. When you go to the IMF offices, there's a corridor. There's chairs of these head of states that they sit and then they call Zimbabwe, and then you walk in. Then they tell you what they want. Then they give you the piece of paper. They tell you how much they're going to give you. They give you the policies that you need to change so that you can do repayments. But it's part of the control. So that's how they operate that side. Now, we were told, we went to bed, we were busy with other things, the March and everything else. We were told that BlackRock was in South Africa and the Eskom debt is going to be sold to BlackRock. So do you think they will treat you that way? No. They will never come to a country where there's nothing for them. So anything and everything that they do, you are a tool. That will never change. Hence, I always said, township, these are concentration camps. You see the lifestyle. You see how we live there in the township. You look at the drainage system, water, electricity. Everything is designed to fail. It's never designed to... You cannot do a development in the township. What kind of development? Because it was designed like that. If you want to do a development, take everything out. Start over. Are we ready to do that? No, we're not ready. So these are all the Western policies that remained here. The interactions are telling you exactly by the curriculum, education system, everything else. We are still there. So it tells you that the kind of leaders we have, how they interact with the Western partners and the Eastern Bloc partners are not the same.
Okay, now there are many struggles still going on in the world today. We can talk about the blockade on Cuba. We can talk about the various conflicts in Eastern and Central Africa. We can talk about all the wars going on. We can talk about Palestine, definitely, Sudan. So, international solidarity and international solidarity with young people is still very, very relevant, right? So, taking lessons from international solidarity that defeated apartheid, how should South Africans recognize and use that international solidarity today, while at the same time, taking care of local issues as well?
When your colonizer has not left, there's little you can do. Look at the number of young people who are graduating every day. You see all over the social media. I was saying we should cut these graduations. Let's graduate when you have a job.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate the jobs.
Yeah.
Let's not celebrate these black clothes that we are given. We don't even know where it came from. When you wear that thing, you think you have arrived. No. Let's celebrate the jobs. Let's celebrate starting of these businesses. Let's have a door. Let's have a government that is willing to really, really use the natural resources of this country back to its own population. But how is that going to be done if we still have Anglo, if you still have all these international companies that are taking the natural resources of this country out? And then the government tells you that there's no money. Now, they just rolled out this vaccine that prevents HIV, and they're giving us a warning that it might not reach all the people because the US aid has been cut off. So where's the budget for Department of Health? Do we have leaders that are willing? So before we get to all these things I'm mentioning, they directly affect the youth. What is the clear agenda? When is the government talking to us about the agenda that is directed to the youth? Since we understand that without the youth, there's no future. What is it that the government of South Africa can learn from the government of Russia, from the government of China, from the government of India, to ensure that the youth is taken care of? Majority of our youth are leaving the country. They go elsewhere. They're not here. The ones that are here, so they're stuck for AMA 350. So we can learn. This is more like watching a movie. They can watch it out there in social media, but can it be implemented in their respective areas? I was in China in 2014. Xi Jinping announced that they were allocating 266 million US dollars to small businesses. 2019, I went back. I saw where the money went. It's clear, it's visible. You can see what is happening. So what is our end goal here? Yes, we can talk. We can want to do all these things. Can these guys be funded to carry on? No. If ever they are funded, you have to know somebody that knows somebody for you to be able to. What is the clear agenda for this country? What are we learning? We can learn. We can see all these things from everywhere.
So maybe then what young people can take then in trying to fight for themselves is that they've got to fight the right person and fight the right system, which is the one that's oppressing them. Of course, they've got to recognize what that system is that they need to fight.
It's difficult because it's not an individual. It's the system. Remember, South Africa has, or let's say the ruling party, has it had the political power. But the economic power is not there. Hence, I said that the Western governments or the Western countries can't say that their contribution in South Africa was that big because their corporations continue to operate here. During those dark days, they were here. So what do you think they can do to help you while they poison your water, while they poison your food, while they stuff you with GMO products, while the curriculum in schools is bad, while agriculture has been cut off schools? I mean, where I come from, we were surrounded by agricultural fields. But all of them now have been destroyed. Nothing works. In the province of Limpopo, they used to assemble buses. Things that when you tell people today, they don't know. Buses, the actual buses were assembled there. Not far from where we lived, there's a big field of sisals where they used to make clothes, send these things overseas, come back. A lot of things were happening. What happened to the physical economy? Do they even understand what was the physical economy about? It's gone. There's things that we used to have. We don't have it anymore. Now, there's special schools that teach agriculture. With us, it was a must. We used to go. Agriculture was part of your subject. You had to do it. In conjunction with geography, that will tell you this kind of clouds, when the rain comes, it will be like this, so you understand about your crops. But all of a sudden now, there are so many things that have changed. Things have been destroyed, and we must normalize and make peace with the fact that there are certain things that we don't have. Where are the willing leaders that can push this kind of idea? Remember, there's many organizations around. Why would governments of Africa be upset with the fact that the Americans have pulled the aid? Why? Because these are things that we should do it ourselves. We should be happy that they pulled. If we want our youth to be empowered, we need somebody that will stand up and say, Panyaza did it in Joburg. He was criticized for taking the Amapanyas. He was willing to go down with that project. Those people are employed today. Imagine if every premier in this country did that. I don't know what is the total number. Is 500? I don't know. But imagine if every premier had that project and stand for it. The changes that we're going to have. Where are the leaders like Panyaza that people will say, let me rather lose my job, but I'll do the right thing? Do we have leaders like him that are willing to die for their people, to lose their jobs for their people? No, we don't. So the youth is in trouble. That is why in other countries, they do what they do. In Kenya, in many other countries, when the petrol price goes up, they protest. Here, you're not going to protest because they give you 350 to shut up. The basic rule of our parents taught us, don't talk while you're eating. So how are you going to talk? So this is the problem that we're faced with. We need willing leaders that will go out and defend the youth and make sure that the government come with a clear plan that is not going to... We have schools all over. We have university all over. What is difficult in ensuring that every school is allocated a program to say, we need 10 students coming from this school to go to that university. They will get jobs from these companies, all these other things. Remember, these are the Western corporations that told our youth, when you finish in the university, you go and look for a job. They say, do you have experience? It was the Western corporations. Now, this 19-year-old came from Bushbuckridge in the village. He goes to Hoshan College. Now he goes to look for a job in Hazelview. Do you have experience? How the hell am I supposed to have experience if I was in the village? But those things can be broken by the government to say, if you're in my country, this guy came from that school, you have to give him an opportunity. Give him. Do we have a government that does that? Yeah. They bribed us with internship. They wasted you one long. How come we don't see white people in internship programs? How come we don't see white people in leadership programs? How come? Where are they?
I'm sure there's a few.
Where? You ask yourself, how come? We want to see, even in driving schools. I mean, I live in them. How often do I see white people going learning how to drive? One or two. I live in the so-called old white suburb. Yeah. I hardly see white people learning how to drive. You only see them in Home Affairs because they want passport. They want to leave. Now banks do passports. We don't see them. Which clinics are they going to? You understand? So I'm saying the day I see white people in factories doing leadership programs, that's when I'll say we have conquered. We have conquered. So they create all these criteria for you, black youth, to say, oh, internship, bridging course. You go for 1 year, they said it's bridging course. You're learning things that you're going to learn next year, they tell you it's a bridging course because they want to delay. They come to tell you, okay, youth ends at 35, but at 60 you must retire. So how much time do you have on earth? Now, who are the custodians of all these things? It's your government. You put your government, you trust them. Hence, I always say that trusting government is like trusting a 5-year-old with a loaded gun in the house. Because anything can happen. All these things that I'm mentioning, until we have willing leaders. And those willing leaders, if you look at it, they get attacked. I mean, Panyaza is sitting with a fraction in the chair because he's saying the right things. He's doing that. He will die for the programs. He talks about things. He says something, he will do it. But his very own people will try and sabotage that because, sabelumlu. It's because the colonizer is here. That is why you're not going to see a clear cut where the youth is going. Remember, the established world fear youth. They fear youth.
Yeah. Youth is always ripe for revolution.
Yes. They believe, let's just ban it. We start over. So, if you look at that, remember the apartheid government learned a lesson. What other protest that gave this country hell outside June 16, 1976? They learned from that experience. Hence, after the looting, the call came from Cape Town, investigate what happened. It was not our people. They were told, investigate. We don't want to see this happening again. When 2021, when there was looting, they were shocked. They didn't see that this could happen. So when the likes of March and March is happening, they learned. They said, okay, it's fine. Black Lives Matter. They get in, fund the leaders, lead people like this. It's no longer going there. You're singing the same songs. You're still working the same position, but it's slightly going in a different direction. Remember, they can't allow this country to bend because it's their investment. They have nowhere to go. The colonizer is here with us. There's no way he can go. He has to meddle in the day-to-day affairs of this country. Hence, he's now meddling even in the ruling party. So, in the midst of all of this, if you know they fear youth, how on earth do you think they will be happy to empower you as a youth? Remember when there was a glitch of the payment with the university, I think it was St. Petersburg, how the media was running wild with the fact that South Africa took students to Russia and left them to die. They never came back to say, no, there was this happened. Even if there's a correction, they're not going to come back because they need to try by all means that the countries that are supposed to help you, they can't. They must not help you. So these are all the things. And we must remember that all these media houses that Anglo brought them. So the perception, I hear people criticize Sunny Fall. No, they're controlled. They're controlled, they're bought. They know if they say this, they're out of a job. What did Swinton said? There's no single journalist that will write the truth and still have a job. He said, we are the intellectual prostitutes of the elite. They play the music, we dance. If anybody were to write anything from his mind and the truth, he will know what will happen to them. So, as long as your colonizer has not left, forget about getting youth to get things right. We can sit here and talk diplomatic, big English. It's not going to happen as long as the colonizer is here. He's looking after his interest. How are you going to look after your interest? That's another story.
And I think that's a great place to end our first in-person interview. I think we've touched on every single note, and I think we end off in a great place, or a eye-opening place for young people, and it's that there's a lot to do. And there's a lot that we need to be empowered to do, but we need a willing leadership to empower young people. And yeah, definitely we'll be talking again in person and on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. That was my interview with Mr. Khonya Mathonsi, our first in-person interview with this contributor who we speak to all the time. And he always touches on quite a lot. He's someone who's got no problem speaking because he calls it how he sees it. You can agree, you can disagree, but if there's one thing that is very, very for sure, is that he means what he says. And he says a lot of interesting and fiery things. For example, I learned from him of this project Swing States. Now, look, I'll be honest in saying I'm not sure where Project Swing State is documented formally, but we can follow the logic of much of what he says. When you look up Project Swing State, you get a brief explanation of a foreign policy strategy that targets global swing states. So these are often identified as Brazil, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and Turkey. These are countries that wield a disproportionate amount of geopolitical influence, and they align with both the West and the BRICS bloc. And I think, look, I don't know what Project Swing State is, but I think we do need to heed Khonya's calls. We do need to heed the calls that were made in this interview to be careful of trying to break apart the BRICS bloc and trying to sow seeds of doubt. And particularly, he's got some scathing criticisms of India and not being quite sure where India stands as it pertains to the BRICS bloc versus the West. We've had quite an interesting conversation about international solidarity during apartheid, but also about international solidarity today. I hope that you've got a little bit to think about. I hope that you've enjoyed the show. I will be back with more. But for today, my name is Seakga Tladi, and I am out of here.